Welcome to CS230. This is lecture 8 and lesson 1, and in this particular lesson we're going to be working with the Apache web server. So that means we're going to be looking at the installation and using Apache as a web server for our projects, and we're going to be using the Xampp installation, which is an installation of Apache that comes from Apache Friends. It's a foundation. Okay, so Xampp then is a very easy to install Apache distribution. It contains the MariaDB database, PHP, which is a back-end programming language, and Perl, my favorite programming language. Okay, and I recommend it because you just download and start the installer, and it's as easy as that, and it works for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. There are two kinds of installations, anyway, for my Mac. One is the Xampp for OS X, and it's a native installer for OS X, and it installs Apache PHP and the Xampp components directly onto the operating system in the Applications Xampp folder. Alternatively, you can have the Xampp VM, and that's a virtual machine for OS X, and that's really a Linux-based virtual machine that runs on your OS X operating system. Similar situation you'll have for running under Windows, and of course the version you have for Linux will probably be native in some respects anyway. So the X in Xampp refers to the operating system. So that means because it can be used on different kinds of operating systems. It used to be called LAMP installation, L where L stood for Linux. So you had a Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP or Perl. Nowadays it refers to any of the operating system, hence the X, and the M refers to MariaDB. And the PP, of course, is Perl and PHP. So, as I said, I recommend using the native installation. They tend to have better performance. So unless you want to play with Apache under Linux, of course, and you can always install your own Linux or a virtual operating system. And I sometimes have Linux and Windows running as virtual operating systems on my Mac, and I get to see what they can do if I want to look at performance, etc. So, while we're talking about installing various lectures or various servers and so forth in lectures, and on Thursday we talked about using Node.js for making servers. So you can download that too, and you can download that and install it on your machine for nodejs.org, and it should default to whatever your operating system is. If you have a Mac OS machine, you might actually be better using Homebrew to do your installation, and if you go to brew.sh you can install Homebrew, and then you just have to open up the terminal window and issue the command brew install node, and that will set up node for you from the ZSH shell. That's my setup anyway, okay, and that's probably good for you to know what I'm using. Okay, for the rest of the course you're going to have to use an SQL database, and initially and that's MariaDB will be fine, and later on you're going to have to use a NoSQL one, and I'd recommend MongoDB for that. Excuse me. You also need to install Python and Java, and it come, with Mac OS, and you might have to install them on Windows. When we start to do server-side RESTful API development, and you might want to use those in preference using JavaScript via Node.js or PHP, but as I say, all of that stuff comes later. Okay, so the rest of this lesson is mostly about playing with Apache. It configures, it automatically defaults on port 80, so even if your computer is not connected to a network, you can access it using the loopback IP address. That's 127.0.0.1, that's localhost, and you can configure Apache to run in any host at all, but 80 is common, so we don't actually have to include it in the URL. Okay, so what we would do is see that www.myweb.com/resource.html is the exact same as myweb.com:80 resource.html. Okay, and we can do all of the same sort of tests that we did with curl, with our Apache installation, and you can also use the installation to create and manage databases using the inbuilt application phpMyAdmin. We might have time to see a little bit about that as well. Okay, so let's switch over to have a look and see what's been going on. In the background, I've been to here to the Apache Friends website. I just went and downloaded my installer for Mac OS. I ran the installer. It opened up this. I just clicked this, double clicked this. It started this dialog, and you get this little wizard here. That's fine. It opened a few windows for me, telling me about, yay, it's great that you installed Xampp. So we'll just launch it by default. So we'll start running. But first, let's check that nothing is running. So let's close this. We're trying to look at localhost here. Okay. And it's here. So it's installed already. Okay. So it's launched already. Okay. So this is a manager for managing our servers, and we see that the Apache web server is running. So here's a file that's been accessed on the web server. I can load it. I can go to localhost and it defaults to a dashboard, which is what we see. So these files are started. If I actually stop the server, stopping the server, it stopped. If I try to access the server, can't connect to the server from my local host up here because I've stopped it. So we start the server and it's starting, and that's nice. So once it starts, we should detect automatically that we're here and it's working. Okay. And here we are. Okay, and it tells you about your installation of Xampp for your operating system. So that's nice, we have an operating system. So we need to go and find out where it is. So let's go to, in my directory, I have the Xampp folder, which is here. And I can look at this, and now I have a whole bunch of various configuration files for our Apache web server. Htdocs is where we put our hypertext documents in here, and we should be able to see that there's an index.php, which is called automatically, applications.html, all of these various things. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to be able to deal with some of the stuff that we have from our coursework. Okay, so let's look at courses and have a peek here. And we had a file that we were playing with already. So let's look at an image, for example. We take the image and we just put it into this directory. So now this image is in. We can have a quick look at this image. It's just Teletubbies. Okay, anyway, sorry, I'm distracted. Sorry. Let's have a look at it on the web server. So we know it's on localhost. It's called POE. So we'll go POE.png, and we've got the file delivered to us from our web server. So it works. It's nice. It's great. And so this is the directory you put our files in. And if we go back to our course to look at some of the documents, maybe we had something from an earlier lecture or lesson. Let's look at the demos that we played with previously. This is this week's demos. Let's look at demo 1. Let's copy this, put it in here. So it's demo 1 is in our web server now, and it's now available on the web server. So let's have a look. Okay. Oh, not found. Sorry. Yeah, because I spelled it incorrectly. Not surprising. Okay, and now we're looking at using map to process an array. We saw this before. And previously, what's going on here? The difference here is that in our previous examples and exercises, we were looking at loading files from directories. So we were loading, but now we're actually loading documents from a web server located on the network. Now, the network just happens to be this machine currently, but that's not a problem. You know, in principle, because my machine has an actual IP address and it's on the university network, and if I open my firewall, this web server running in this machine is visible and accessible from anywhere in the world. So we're now actually using a proper web servers for our work. So for the future, rather than loading having things in files, you need to install a web server, Xampp, install and make sure all your work sits in your Htdocs directory and is accessible. And that's the way you start doing web development from now onwards. Okay, thank you very much for watching.